There's been a lot of discussion over the definition of wokeness because recently on The Hills Rising, Brianna Joy Gray asked Bethany Mandel what is wokeness, and Bethany struggled to answer. She later clarified on Twitter, but of course, woke people, which are basically in a cult, saw this as an opportunity and pounced. And now they're saying things like conservatives don't even know what wokeness is. They can't even define it, which is the stupidest thing ever because it's been defined ad nauseum and been going on for more than a decade. But I bring this up in the context of this story from Vice News. The Stop Cop City movement is vandalizing pro-police companies across the U.S. This is what I would call a terror campaign. But of course, this links up with the idea of wokeness very simply and easily. And I am going to give you a strong definition of wokeness for which I disagree with many of the prominent thinkers on the matter. And I'll give you my thoughts, as I already have in many segments. But first, I want to bring you the news which you came here to see, which is the ongoing terror campaign. The reason I highlight the definition of wokeness is because Vice News, in any sane reality, would tell you that the violence and vandalism happening across the United States is part of a terrorism campaign. But a component of wokeness is a cult-like mentality, where you don't talk to people outside of your cult and you adhere to the cult no matter what. Eco-anarchists, they call them, eco-anarchists. Well, people who are woke, a component of wokeness is being in a cult, because a lot of people, let me explain. A lot of people want to say wokeness is rooted in cultural Marxism, postmodernist theory, critical race theory, critical gender theory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they go off into this big thing about the universities and academia. I'll break it down for you in greater detail, but my point is simply, it is an algorithmically generated cult, an amalgam of ideologies that seemingly make no sense, but have as a core component equity, albeit Bernie Sanders recently came out opposed to this, which is more evidence that my definition is correct. Wokeness represents an amalgam of leftist ideologies that contradict each other, that have been forced together due to social media algorithms, and people online who are woke are basically proponents of a cult ideology, a chaotic and destructive force that smashes together disparate ideologies and often conflicts with itself. And that's why it's so hard for the average person to define. To put it simply, it is a cult of disparate leftist ideologies mashed together. Now, I can give you greater definitions and greater understanding when we break it all down, but let me talk to you about this terror campaign. The reason the terror campaign is ongoing is because woke people have no idea what they're doing, why they're doing it. They represent no real ideology. It is not backed by anything other than chaos, destruction. So let me break it down for you. Let's read the news. I know, I'm so desperate to just talk about the definition of wokeness, but let me read for you first to give you an understanding of what is born of wokeness. On an anonymous online blog, a group of eco-anarchists claimed credit for smashing the glass doors of one of the companies contracted to build Atlanta's so-called Cop City in late January and spray painting the building's exterior with their slogans. The blog, called Scenes from the Atlanta Forest, functions as a virtual bulletin board for the Stop Cop City movement. A group of environmentalists and anti-police activists, or forest defenders, who oppose plans to build a police training facility in Atlanta Forestlands, because they say it'll decimate the ecosystem and further militarize police. Now, if that were true, let's stop wokeness. Okay, if it were true that that was their real motivation, some kind of environmentalism or stopping police militarization, that would not explain why it is they burned down private homes and why they flipped over a guy's truck and torched it. Because the reality is, wokeness does not represent ideologies. There are people who may go out with signs and say, I believe in X and I demand Y. When you have these people going out and acting seemingly in a contradictory manner to their own ideologies, or seemingly in a random and destructive way, it makes literally no sense. Now, you can argue these eco-terrorists and these far-left terrorists smashing up businesses make sense. They're targeting the businesses, and that is a component of what they're fighting against. But what they're fighting against makes no sense. They're environmentalists and they're anti-cop, and they say, but the intersection of these things, they come together. No, it is random, chaotic, algorithmic mishmash. I've explained it before. I'll explain it again. But first, let's read more. In this particular post, activists uploaded photos of their purported handiwork. The exterior of the Atlas Technical Consultants building in Manhattan, boarded up with caution tape around it. They say that they targeted Atlas specifically because of its relationship to Cop City. It looks like Atlas received a visit from some disgruntled little forest bunnies, they wrote online in neon green text. Atlas isn't safe, even in the center of the so-called police state of New York City. They aren't safe anywhere. We do this so comrades everywhere feel empowered to act with swiftness, creativity, and freedom. That relatively minor act of property damage was just one of dozens of instances of vandalism or sabotage that eco-anarchists have taken credit for via blog posts on behalf of Stop Cop City movement. Since last May, Vice News reviewed archives from this blog and found more than 60 posts over the last 9 months where anonymous activists took responsibility for incidents in 19 states because of the target's relationship to Cop City or the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is funding the police training facility project. We do this so comrades everywhere feel empowered to act with swiftness, creativity, and freedom. Sure. So it's a cult with disparate ideologies backing it that have teamed up for the express purpose of destroying things. Sounds like wokeness. Sounds like a component of everything we see within wokeness. The reason I bring it up in this context is this terror campaign's been ongoing. It's only going to get worse, and it's being defended by the likes of Vice. For what reason? For what reason is the narrative from Vice that they're eco-anarchists and environmentalists and not terrorists? Because wokeness is basically the political left, and you must adhere to it regardless of what ideology they push, seemingly making no sense. Take a look at this story from the Daily Mail. Bizarre moment. Woke LGBT group descends on Florida Capitol to accuse Governor Ron DeSantis of erasing transgender babies. It makes no sense. Of course it doesn't. This is what wokeness is. The procession was attended by activists who took issue with the governor's bills involving medical care for trans children in the Sunshine State. I love how even the Daily Mail calls it transgender care. Well, I call it genital mutilation and medical sterilization. During the demonstration, drag queens held signs that read, "Free states don't ban drag shows." Well, Ron DeSantis did not ban drag shows. Ron DeSantis is barring children from being present at sex shows. Why do they have a problem with it? Probably because they're pedophiles. Other opponents were seen chanting against DeSantis outside the building in Tallahassee with rallying cries like, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Ron DeSantis has got to go." Okay. I bring you this tweet from this guy, Toure. Toure. He says, I make media Prince podcast docuseries. Who is Prince? Blah, blah, blah. He says, I have still not found one conservative who's able to define woke. Well, define red-pilled. That's my question to you. In the comments, all of you can define red-pilled. I would ask these people to define it because red pill and woke are very, very similar in very different ways, but it's interesting. They both represent this idea that you've been awakened to some reality that has been kept secret from you for a long time. Now, the reality with red pilling is that its true definition is you've come to realize the narrative of the corporate press and the establishment are not congruent with reality. That is to say, they're lying. And thus, you don't know too much other than you don't trust these MFers. Woke is supposed to represent basically the same thing, but it is the yin yang. Wokeness is not defined by critical theory or critical gender theory or race theory or postmodernism or Marxism. None of these things. And the problem is we have deferred to academics, people I respect and like and have come on this show. We've deferred to them because we view them as the experts, because they can tell you when someone comes out and says something like Wimixin. Yeah, that's supposed to be women, but they put an X in it. Or they say non-binary. They show you the root of these ideologies and say, see, it was born of these ideas, Marx, the Frankfurt School, Marcuse, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not correct in the grand scheme of things. Wokeness is simply defined as the culture that has been born of algorithmic manipulation. It is rooted in disparate leftist ideologies. Thus, you can see some semblance of them. but much like a blob creature that absorbs humans into its biomass, and then you can see the faces of those people going, "Ah," like bursting from its flesh. That is not John. It's like a zombie horde, okay? Understand this. In the horde of zombies as they're marching, you see that guy and you're like, it's John. John, snap out of it. And they're like, it's not John anymore. It's a zombie. The zombies have no ideology. They just spread zombism. That's what wokeness is. Wokeness, as simply defined as possible, is the modern left culture that was created by algorithmic manipulation. End of story. Now, let's go back in time and I will walk you through the narrative and history that is wokeness. Of course, you can listen to great minds like James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian who are relatively correct in their assessments that much of this ideology is rooted in the universities. There's the march through the institutions where you can argue it was the Soviets wanted to implant these communist ideas and Marxist values in universities to spread them as a seed, which would then destroy this country. Perhaps. But that does not explain the emergence of what we would describe as woke, social justice warriors, feminists, intersectional feminists, the change in the language. It does not explain how this all coincides with the rise of technology. Technology explains all of it. Let me break it down for you. In 2008, and many of you may have heard me say this, so it bears repeating in regards to this, and I'll try to elaborate more and give you more details on what's happening in society. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever social media platform existed, was trying to find a way to keep people on the platform. Now, it is true that for the most part, we do adhere to certain ideologies. We do think racism is bad, overwhelmingly in this country. We do think white supremacy is bad, overwhelmingly in this country. Social media amplified these views of the average person 100-fold and hyperpolarized them to an extreme degree. With the rise of social media algorithms, we saw a bunch of different ideologies actually begin to emerge, but a selection process emerged based on what advertisers thought was safe. White nationalism actually started to become relatively prominent. Surprisingly, you had a bunch of accounts from people who were talking about a country just for white people. It never became as prominent as, say, wokeness is. And this is mostly because when it started to bubble up and we started to see more and more people make videos like this, there was an intervention. Society as a whole said, conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever, dude, that's messed up and we don't like it. Thus, it was excised from the conversation. But this left a conservative space and a liberal space where the tendency always skewed to what was perceived as accepting. Tolerance became acceptance, and now it's becoming mandatory. That is to say, we started by saying, look, live your life, do what you want to do. Then it was, well, if that's the case, then we need to legalize gay marriage. Well, if that's the case, kids need to learn why those two men are hugging and kissing. And if that's the case, we should put this in programs. We should put it in schools. It should be mandatory learning. And that's where we're at now. When you have people say things like, you can't define woke, it's because woke represents chaos and disorder. Woke is a word used to define people who are zombified. That's why many people can't define beyond woke, because woke is woke, right? What I mean to say is a woke person can have any one of a bunch of different ideologies. That's why I say it's not rooted in the institutions. If we go back to the beginning of the culture war and where woke comes from, it didn't start as a pejorative term. I mean, pejorative literally defines a word as something that gradually became offensive or to be used as an insult. It started as someone saying, I've awakened, much like the phrase red pill means the same thing. You've awakened to reality. With the rise of social media, you had young people being constantly slammed by algorithmically manipulated articles that would generate the most rage and get the most clicks. For the left, it was racism and sexism. Thus, we saw the rise of intersectional feminism. Intersectional feminism was feminism, but understanding that a black woman experiences racism and sexism in very different ways. Thus, intersectionality was born. I remember having a conversation with Peter Boghossian where he said intersectionality, that was the word back then, was a non-theistic religion. But how is it now that we no longer use the words social justice warrior, the phrase social justice warrior, social justice, intersectionality? Now we use the word woke or cultural Marxism or critical race theory. And why is it that we've gone from arguing critical race theory in schools to now critical gender theory? Isn't critical race theory still happening? Thus, my point should be very clear for all of you. To my friends who argue that it's rooted in these ideas, blah, 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 have you not stopped to ask yourself why it is that you yourselves have argued first intersectionality, then critical race theory, then critical gender theory? Yes, of course, they're rooted in similar ideas, but why is it that modern culture is debating several different things all at once? It's because you are arguing with cult members who have no real ideology and will do whatever the zombified cult says. Wokeness is not defined by an ideology. Thus, when Bernie Sanders goes on TV and says, I think we want equality, not equity, you see Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks says Bernie Sanders is right. Nobody's talking about equity, despite the fact that President Joe Biden put out an equity plan. They are zombies. They have no root ideology. I know this because I have covered this for a decade plus. I was on the ground meeting these people. It's very frustrating for me when people are like, you need to understand the universities were spreading critical theory. And critical theory is, dude, 5 years ago, you and I were arguing about feminist theory and the feminist thinkers, and now all of a sudden you've moved on to something else. On this channel, actually, the default tags for years were SJW feminism, because I didn't care about this channel. Because when I first started it, I was just like, yeah, whatever. And then I was like, one day I looked and I was like, oh yeah, every video was just tagged the same old thing from like 2015. So weird. 2016 or 17 maybe. Because we didn't say woke back then. Woke took over. There was a period where we were arguing about schools teaching critical race theory. And this is only like a year and a half ago. Critical race theory in schools. Schools were teaching kids to be racist. We still do have that conversation, but it's mostly been sidelined by critical gender theory. So which is it? Is woke all of it, one of it, two of it, none of it? I will tell you this. Wokeness can change tomorrow. There's a meme, and they say that if you were on the left, as they describe it, and you deviate from leftist economic policy, nobody will care. But if you deviate from their social ideas, then you're right wing, because that's what the left is. The left is not defined by economic policy anymore. When experiencing this and looking through it and wondering why it is that the argument has shifted so dramatically, but there is still the same concept of woke. Simply put, it's woke today, but it will be called something else tomorrow. It went from intersectionality. First, it was feminism. It was like third wave feminism, fourth wave feminism. We had this period of false rape accusations were big in the media. Everything just keeps shifting. Woke just means a culture built of leftist ideologies through algorithmic manipulation. That's it. A person who is woke may or may not believe in giving kids sex changes, may or may not believe in teaching about segregating classrooms and things like that, because it is a disparate faction. However, they will all line up next to each other when attacked because it is a cult. I look at it this way. Wokeness is basically a cult with no leader. It is a non-theistic religion, much like Peter Boghossian argued back about intersectionality. It's very much the same thing. Intersectional feminism, as I described, it's the idea that a white woman experiences sexism, a black man racism, and a black woman experiences a combination of the two, which is the intersection of sexism and racism, is a component of wokeness. But when you talk to someone that you would define as woke, do you think they know any of this? When you talk to someone you say is woke, are they going to tell you it's equity? They might. But Bernie Sanders just changed the game. So how can Bernie Sanders be pushing wokeness? How can the Young Turks be pushing wokeness if they've now changed on a dime and now represent something totally different? Thus, if it comes to the point where Bernie Sanders, I think it was on Bill Maher, says, I think equity is equality of outcome and we want equality of opportunity. He can just change like that and then everyone marches in lockstep. That should say to you right there, there is no core ideology. As I have said for years, it is a chaotic and destructive force that is destroying things due to jealousy, anger, or otherwise. They will mask their actions behind some of these ideas, but that's not really why they're doing it. Why are these people going around and vandalizing and destroying buildings? Is it because they care about trees? Of course not. Greta Thunberg reportedly took down her tweet that said the world was going to end by 2023. She said something like the world will end unless we stop this by 2023. She apparently deleted the tweet and everyone made fun of her because she doesn't actually think anything. Look, I am not a conservative, and I sit here with conservatives all the time. And I explained to them, as I explained to Steve Bannon last Friday, you want to win over liberals and stuff. I'm here, buddy. Okay, I am not a conservative, never have been. I just think there are facts. And if you are someone who is a critical thinker and believes in facts and you are not in their cult, you will have a conversation with Steve Bannon, who, by the way, calls for a wealth tax, who calls for economic populism, much like Occupy Wall Street did, in very much the same way. But he's far right. They call him a white supremacist. It's because they're in a cult. They're in a cult. They're in a cult. Okay? It is a cult born of social media algorithms that has attached everyone to each other. I still have friends who are like, I think the coronavirus started from a bat soup. And I'm like, did you ever stop to think about the logic of that statement? No, but they're saying what they need to say to fit in. That's it. That's all that matters. They are zombified, social zombies. That's all it is. If a prominent thinker were to emerge today and say something like, right-wingers want to ban X, and then the right came out and said X is bad, all of the quote-unquote woke people would adhere to it. So this can be simply done, experimented upon, if people on the right choose a line of thinking and promote it, and then watch in 2 seconds as the cult comes out in opposition. How about this? War. Why is there an overlap between support for the war in Ukraine and wokeness? That doesn't make sense, right? If the academics were correct in postmodernist thinking, and it's all rooted in the universities, that would explain, there would be some answer as to why people are pro-war. The reason they're pro-war is because it's a cult, because pro-war makes no sense. Pro-Ukraine intervention. How can people like Hassan Piker be like, the military-industrial complex is bad, but we should support war in Ukraine? Huh? It makes no sense. In the same breath, in a video, he criticized me because after agreeing with him, I said, the military-industrial complex is bad. We shouldn't be giving $100 billion to Ukraine. And then he says, yes, the military-industrial complex is bad, but bro literally said that we should just leave them on their own. Bro, you're on your own. Why are you supporting Ukraine? See, I have logic behind my actions. I have plans. I'm looking at the machine and I'm like, what can we do to make things better? The left simply says, tell me what to say and I will say it. It is an amorphous blob. It is a giant mass that absorbs people and their faces stretch out through the latex. And you see their face, but they ain't really there anymore. It's a zombie cult with nothing backing it. And the funny thing to me is, I have seen so much of this. I have seen for so long the changes in their ideology that it seems very obvious to me that anyone who's paid attention for the past decade is going to tell you everything they believe in has been completely inverted over the past few years. So how can you claim the left is rooted in critical theories when their ideas of what they're behind change? And now you have Bernie Sanders and the Young Turks saying they're for equality now. That's it. It's a cult. Bernie says it, and then everyone's like, is that what we're for now? Is that what we agree with? The zombies look around and say, just tell me what to say so I don't be right-wing. Wokeness. Anyway, there's a lot more to be said about this. Maybe I got to bring James. James, we're going to bring you back on the show. We're going to have a debate. We're going to talk about this. I debated it with Peter Boghossian a long time ago. And I think because they are academics, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And for me, I am a social media person, right? So I can certainly understand how many of these ideas they claim to represent did start in universities, and they're explaining it correctly. But the only reason it exists, if you look at the data, is because social media. Take a look at 2008 to 2011, the LexisNexis graphs showing all of the woke words rising and skyrocketing. It was just an algorithmic cult trying to make money, and it poisoned the minds of young people who now can't see reality and are desperate to say or do anything to fit in. Think of it this way. The average young person suffers depression when they don't get a lot of views or likes on their content. Fact. That is what wokeness is, but political. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.